This is potentially the most controversial episode that I have made so far. This matter has been simmering quite some time. And I have really been wondering, what does this thing, man? What does this thing mean to us? What does it mean to me as a foreigner? What does it mean to the rest of immigrants who are in the United States of America? There's been a growing anti-immigrant sentiment in the United States conservative um, uh, segment of the population. And it's been growing more and more brazen to the point where I've been wondering, what does this mean? What does this mean? President Trump has issued some things that he is concerned about. Some of them that I agree with. I mean, some of the things that were also raised by, what's her name? Marjorie Taylor Greene. Some of them, I agree with them. I mean, a lot of the things that have been raised are sensible things that can be agreed upon by people of goodwill. But what I've been seeing happening now is that there's been growing more and more a sentiment in the American right that I can accurately describe as anti-immigrant sentiment. Not just anti-illegal immigration, but anti-immigrant sentiment. It started, for instance, when President Trump, well, obviously said it. I mean, you know how JD Vance made statements about how the reason why prices of houses in the US, or why there's a housing shortage in the US, it's because of immigrants. I saw a statement that was made by Rob Smith, one of the leading conservative voices, also making statements. That statement, I mean, I responded to him on Facebook where he was basically saying everything that is wrong with America is because of immigrants. I disagreed with that position. And it seems to me that conservatives in the US are becoming more and more brazen in their anti-immigrant sentiment. And let me start by saying, as I've said in the past, the United States of America belongs to Americans. That is true. It's a fact without any equivocation. Only Americans can decide who can come into this great country. Americans only can decide that. None of us who are foreigners can decide this. We can have our opinions about it, but this is something that only Americans can decide through the process of their elected representatives. That is one principle that I am willing to be the hill that I'm willing to die on. But with that said, let's discuss what has happened now, while we recognize the fact that only Americans can decide who enters into their country. If you have any issues with that principle, then you and I depart. Then you and I can't agree. Because if you disagree that only Americans can decide who comes into their country, under what circumstances they come into their country, then there's nothing that you and I can discuss. With that said, President Trump made some really scathing statements about immigrants and immigration a couple of weeks ago, where he made statements that in the United States of America there is up to 50 million foreigners. I don't know how true those numbers are. He said that there's up to 20 million illegal immigrants in the United States. I don't know how true those numbers are either. I do know, though, that the number of illegal immigrants in the United States is way too high. It's way too high. So we can start there and say that the number of illegal immigrants in the United States is way too high, and there is no point in us, even me as a foreigner, discussing the issue of immigration if you as Americans continue to keep your borders open whenever Democrats are in power. Because what's happening now is that Trump is in office. Eventually, there's going to be a Democrat who is the president. There's going to be a Democrat Congress. And you know what's going to happen? They're going to open the borders once more. Then they're going to put in 20 more million illegal immigrants. That's one element of this issue. And the issue of the resources of the American people that are being used by illegal immigrants is an issue that we as foreigners can't solve. It is an issue that Americans need to solve. Americans need to decide on their own that you stop putting foreigners on SNAP benefits, you stop putting foreigners on housing benefits like subsidized housing and public housing. You need to decide that you need to stop putting illegals on Medicaid and Medicaid. That's a decision that Americans have made. And that's a decision. There's a decision that Americans need to say it ends. It stops. And this issue of being frustrated with the number of with the number of illegal immigrants who are using U.S. taxpayer dollars in terms of public benefits is neither here nor there when it is Americans who are putting these illegals on these benefits. I don't understand, how do you guys allow this mess to continue for so long? And I'm speaking as a South African who we have the same problem. And the problem is that our problem in South Africa is 10 times worse. Because South Africa doesn't have a border. So the problem that you guys are facing is not as bad as the problem we're facing. South Africans have illegals in public schools, in public hospitals. It is a mess. It is a mess. So I understand that concept. But then the more this issue is being discussed, some issues started being raised where I'm starting to realize that, okay, President Trump is also not happy, not just with the issue of illegal immigrants, but he's also not happy with the legal immigrants who are in the United States of America. And then we started seeing more and more of the conversation moving towards saying, okay, there are too many migrants moving into the United States of America. There's another post that was made on Facebook recently by, you can go check the page of the company owned by Dan Bongino, where they were sharing that in the United States right now, 1 in 6 people who are American citizens are not native born Americans. This is to say that 1 in 6 Americans are foreign born. And this matter obviously is being shared in a manner of saying that this is a negative, that this number needs to come down. This number needs to come down because, for whatever the reason might be, the rate of foreign born Americans is too high. That's apparently the argument. But also, if I'm tying that argument with the argument that was made by President Trump, which is to say that he wants to stop all immigration from third world country, I understood that to mean, because when you say third world country, what do you mean? Do you mean Africa? And you mean what? The Middle East? And you mean what? South America. So you are basically saying that the only migrants that you want are from Europe, which basically means that the only migrants that you want are white Europeans. So if that's the case, let's discuss the matter of if the only migrants that the United States of America wants is white Europeans, what does that mean? Let's go back again to saying that the only people who can decide the migration policy and the immigration policy of the United States of America can only be American citizens. I can disagree as much as I want, but the principle remains Americans and Americans only need to decide this matter. But now here's the problem. There's not a single Western nation, from the United States to Canada to all of Europe, including New Zealand and Australia, who are reproducing enough to either meet or exceed the replacement ratio. What is the replacement, you might ask? The replacement ratio is the ratio of reproduction that a population needs to be reproducing at in order to replace its existing population. All of these nations in the European Union, including the United Kingdom and the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, have not been reproducing at the replacement rate or more for the past 30 years. Meaning what exactly? Meaning that you are not giving birth to enough people, regardless of race. So if you want more Europeans to migrate to the United States of America, Europe also has a problem that they are not reproducing enough. And the problem of not reproducing enough is even worse in Europe. It is so bad in Europe that they are now paying couples to have kids. There are certain nations in Scandinavia where the problem is so bad, the problem of lack of reproduction, that they have to bribe couples to have children. So then, how exactly are you going to replace these brown and black migrants who are flooding the United States of America with one blue-eyed or green-eyed Europeans when Europeans aren't reproducing enough themselves? When they themselves are having a quagmire of reproduction problems. So how exactly is this going to happen? It can't happen. Because even right now, Europe has to rely on Asian and Middle Eastern migrants in order for them to be able to keep their labor market going. There is a problem in the West, and the problem is there is no reproduction happening. Not just that there is no reproduction happening in the West, including the United States, is that people are not getting married, people are not having kids. And when people are getting married, they are having 2 or less kids. And when you're having so many people in the West not having kids, and the people who are having kids are having 2 or less kids, then you are not reproducing and even close to the amounts that you need to reproduce. So then, where are you going to get all of these million white, blue-eyed, green-eyed Caucasians from Europe who are going to come and fill up your population gap that you need in the United States when they themselves have a huge, huge population problem? It can't happen. So let's leave that aside. And then there's the question of, is it racist? Is it intrinsically racist for the United States of America to prefer white, Caucasian, blue-eyed, green-eyed Europeans for migrants as opposed to black or Asian migrants? And the answer is, for me, not necessarily. Not necessarily. The desire to maintain a certain racial makeup is a desire that is seen all over the world. There are people among black people who are overtly saying that blacks need to marry blacks only, blacks need to maintain racial purity, blacks need to continue to marry other blacks, because if they don't marry other blacks, you are doing racial mixing and all that stuff. So if blacks have this black supremacy notion of racial purity, then why is it wrong for white people to have the same notions? If there are black people who say that it is unthinkable for black people to marry people outside of their race because black people need to maintain the racial purity of black people, and none of you call black people racist for those notions, well then, when white people say they want more white people, then it's fair game, just as it's fair game when black people say they want more black people. As soon as you allowed black people to continue wanting these racial quotas of more black people in this sector, more black people in that area, more black people in this industry, then you forgo any complaints of racism when white people say they want more white people moving to the United States of America. As long as you tolerated the notion that it is a net positive when more people of color migrated into the United States of America, and you celebrated it and you wrote stories about it and you cover it wall to wall on your news, on your television stations, then you forego any claims of crying racism when white people say we prefer white migrants. If you can go on national television and say that you prefer more more migrants of color, then white people can also go on national TV and say that they want migrants, white migrants. What's good for the goose must be good for the gander. But also, this issue of certain racial groups preferring more people who look like them is not something that is unique to white people, as I said before. We see this thing all the time, where black people say they will never marry a person who is Asian or white because they think that if they do that, it's diluting the black race. None of you call them white black supremacists when they say that. So there is this notion in the black community that black people need to marry other black people or else our race is being diluted. If that notion can be tolerated among the black community, then it should be fine for white people to say that, listen, we also want white people to marry other white people. We want white babies. If it is okay for you to say we want black babies, then white people should be able to say we want black babies. That is the use to it. That is the use to it. If you are able to say I prefer my racial group to be dominant, why can't white people say I prefer my racial group to be dominant? There's one thing that I've realized as someone who does date across racial lines. I do have a preference, obviously, right? Okay, not obviously. I do have a preference for white women and Latina women. Maybe Latina women are a little bit ahead of white women in my preference right now. Yeah, I do have that kind of preference. Okay, sure. But I know a lot of white people who do not think that it is wise for white people to marry non-white people. I don't get upset at those people. I don't call them names. I don't necessarily think that they're racist. Just as how I know many people who are my racial group who do not think that it is wise for black people to marry anyone else who is not black. If it is okay for my own black people, if you want to call it that, to say that it is not okay for black people to marry anyone who is not black, then white people should also be allowed to say white people must only marry white people. I don't believe in it. I date white women, I date Asian women and Latino women, but I don't necessarily think that it's racist for someone to think that people must date within or breed within their racial group. With that said, there is a problem that we are facing in the West, in the United States, is that when you bring millions of people into the United States who share absolutely nothing with the United States of America when it comes to values, worldview, there will be a problem, inevitably. It's not an issue of color, actually, as much as it is an issue of values. Well, I mean, for some people, colors, I suppose, plays a role, but when you're taking someone from Afghanistan or Iran or Iraq and you bring it into the United States of America, the values are so different. They're so different that it is going to be a big problem. So I can see why someone who lives in suburban Wisconsin thinks that it's better for them to get a blue-eyed Caucasian from Amsterdam. That makes sense because values are almost identical. I can see why a white person who lives in somewhere in Michigan thinks that, well, it's better if we get white Europeans because when you're getting someone from, say, London or Paris or wherever in Europe, the values are going to be similar. Yes, the race also will be similar, but more importantly, the values will be similar. One of the problems that Europe is having right now is that you have millions of people who come from the Middle East who have flooded Europe, who have absolutely nothing in common with European values. And what has happened subsequently is that there has been a rise in conflict and intercommunal conflict, terrorist activities, violence, because you're having people who come from a totally different world altogether and have been brought into Europe. So part of that is the reason why some migrants or immigrants who move into the United States are actually a net negative. That is also true with certain migrants who come from Africa, like Nigeria, who have not done a good job in representing themselves very well, where Nigerians everywhere in the world are known for being scammers. It's not that Nigerians are all scammers, it's just that people, almost everyone who has been scammed was scammed by Nigeria. So it makes it very difficult for any nation in the world to just open its doors to Nigerians. You could be some of the most amazing, hardworking Nigerian there is out there, but the fact that so many of your brothers and sisters who are from Nigeria, when they come into these nations like the United States or Canada or any place in Europe, they're scamming people. The fact that we have that situation, it doesn't help your case. It's also the same. It's a similar situation with migrants who are from Somalia and Ethiopia, most of which are concentrated in the areas around the Midwest, like Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota. And a lot of these folks are good people, but a lot of them are responsible for a lot of crime, especially in Minnesota. Folks, it's a problem. So when someone says, you know what, no more people from Ethiopia, no more people from Somalia into the United States of America, it's going to be very difficult to argue against that. So some of the behavior of migrants or immigrants when they move into the United States of America make it very difficult for the rest of us. It makes it very difficult for any immigrant who comes from Africa or who comes from the Middle East or South America. So do I think that this anti-immigrant sentiment is race-based that I'm seeing growing around the right? I think some of it is race-based, yes, but some of it is just the issue of pragmatism. Some of it is a matter of we want people who have similar values from us. Some of it is just the issue of fatigue. People are completely fatigued, folks. I know this because I know that, for instance, in South Africa, South Africans are completely fatigued with migrants. It is a problem. It is an absolute problem. So, and you can come with all of your smooth arguments about no, oh, they're not all the same. It is bigotry to put all of these people in the same bracket. But the problem is that people are just fatigued. People are fatigued. They're just tired. So there has to be a level of understanding why people are saying what they are saying, why people are so hurtful when it comes to immigrants. And for me, what upsets me the most with regards to immigrants in the United States is every single one of you illegal motherfuckers who come into the United States of America and you are on food stamps and you are using public housing and you're on Medicaid and you're on Medicaid. What is wrong with you people? What is the matter with you? What is the matter with you? When there are thousands and tens of thousands of American veterans who are homeless, and you come from wherever you're coming from to use our public housing. What is wrong with you? Because every single one of these illegal immigrants who are using public housing in the United States of America will never allow this thing in their own countries. They'll never abide this. Yeah, so it is very frustrating. It's very frustrating, and it has to end. It has to end. And let's see how it goes. I really don't know if there are 10 million illegals or if there are 20 million illegals, but my view about it is that deport them all. Fucking deport them all. Every single one of them. 20 million illegals. How did you let this happen? How did you let this happen, folks? Anyways, cheers.